We continue now at the top of Daf Zayin Amud Aleph and Meseches Yoma. This is Yoma Daf 7a. On the previous Amud, there was a machlokas Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes, whether Tumah is Hutra B'tzibur or Tumah is Dechuya B'tzibur. Rav Nachman says it's Hutra B'tzibur, and Rav Sheshes says it's Dechuya B'tzibur. Now, in the first version of Rav Nachman, the Gemara had said that if within the same Beis Av that's supposed to serve on that day, you have some Kohanim who are Tahor and some that are Tameh, in that situation, you should use the Kohanim who are tar, even though Tumah is Hutra B'tzibur. But again, in such a situation, you have Kohanim available who are pure, you should use them. But now in the second version of Rav Nachman, the Gemara is saying, no, even if within the same Beis Av, the Beis Av that's supposed to serve on that day, you have Kohanim who are pure, you don't need to use them. This is a public carbon, and therefore you can use Tumah as well. As the Gemara explains, D'chol Tumas Meis B'tzibur Rachmana Sharia, because anytime you have Tumas Meis regarding a carbon which is a carbon tzibur, the Torah says it is completely permissible. You don't have to use the Kohanim who are pure. Rashi over here explains, D'chol Tumas Meis B'tzibur Sharia Rachmana T'chsiv Ishkiyeh Tamei L'nefesh Yasa Pesach Sheni Ish Nilchel Pesach Sheni Vein Tzibur Nidachin. An individual has to do Pesach Sheni if he's Tamei Meis, but the Tzibur, if they're Tamei Meis, they don't get pushed off. They can even bring the carbon Pesach B'tumah. And Rashi points out, Aval Zavinu Mitzoroi Nidos V'Yodos Shetumaso Yotze Ela Migufo. What about other kinds of Tumah? Not Tumas Meis. So you have a Zav, Mitzora, Nida, Yoledes. All of those situations where the Tumah comes from the body, Lo Hutra, that is not permitted B'tzibur. Uvo El Nida Kinida. And Rashi says, a Bo El Nida has the same status as a Nida as well, not going to be considered like a Tamei Meis in this situation. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes says, B'no Aminallah, how can I prove to you that Tumah is Dechuya B'tzibur? The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa. Let's say a person is standing, he's in the middle of bringing the carbon ha'omer, v'nitmes b'yadu, and it becomes tamei. He tells people that it's tamei, they bring a substitute, they bring one that is pure. Now this is a carbon tzibur. And the Brisa continues, if the only one available is that particular carbon, we say to him, have a pikeach v'shasuk, be smart, be quiet, don't tell anyone it's tamei, and just bring it b'tumah. Now in this case, what does the Brisa say? The Gemara says, katani mihas. Nevertheless, it says in this Brisa, Omer umevin acheres tachtel, that lechatchila we should find a substitute. So apparently Tumah is dechuya b'tzibur. The minchas Omer is a carbon tzibur, and we see that lechatchila, if you can find one, if you can find a substitute that is not tamei, that's what you should do. So it seems like Tumah is dechuya b'tzibur. It's pushed off, but lechatchila we try to do it b'tara. So the Gemara responds, Amar Rav Nachman says back, Modino heicha diiko shirayim la'achila. I admit that in a situation where you have a carbon where there's going to be some leftover that's supposed to be eaten, so in that situation, for sure, yes, you're not allowed to eat it b'tumah. The idea that tumah is pushed off b'tzibur, or tumah is hutra b'tzibur, is only to offer the carbon. It's not to eat the carbon. So in a situation where you have a carbon that you're going to be eating from that carbon, it's better to bring it b'tara. Even I admit that that is the case. Rashi over here says, "Di'afagav the carbon sibur karev b'tumah." Even though a carbon sibur can be brought b'tumah, eino nechel b'tumah. You don't eat the carbon b'tumah. Kedamrinan b'keitzat solin uva mincha hanikmetz is not by a carbon mincha where you take a kometz, you put that on the mizbech, you eat the rest. Modina, then I admit to mehadrinan lasos b'tara. Then in that case, we would try to do it b'tara sheyu shirayim necholin. That way, the leftover, the remaining part, can be eaten properly. And the Gemara continues. Meisvei, we have another question. This is from a Tosefta and Menachos. The Tosefta says, Hayamakriv minchas parim ve'elim ukvasim. Let's say the person is bringing the carbon mincha that accompanies the parim, the elim, and the kvasim, v'nitmes biyadu, and it becomes tamei. Omer u'mevian acheres tachteh. He says that it's tamei. We bring another one, a substitute. V'mein sham elhi, and if that's the only one available, Omer and lo, we say to him, have a pikeach v'shasuk. Again, be smart and quiet, and we'll just bring it b'tumah. And the Gemara says, my lav isn't not talking about, what does it mean over here, the carbon mincha with the parim, elim, and kvasim? Is it not referring to parim, elim, and kvasim dechag? It's referring to the parim and the elim and the kvasim that are brought on the holiday. And Rashi over here explains, my lav, parim, ve'elim, dechag, shein carbon sibur. We're talking about a carbon sibur over here brought on the holiday, on the chag. Uzmano kavu, it's brought at a set time. Uminchas nesachim, this is basically the carbon mincha that comes along with the nesachim, with the libations. And the halacha is doche tumah. That should be doche tumah. V'kartani omer u'mevian acheres tachteh. Yet what does it say? It says you should bring a substitute if you can. Alma dechuya hi b'tzibur. You see that it's dechuya b'tzibur. You see that lechatchila you should try to find something that's tar. So it's basically the same proof as before. But the difference is the minchas nesachim. There's no part that's eaten. So therefore you can't give the same answer that we had before, that there's shirayim over here. So what are you going to say in this situation? So the Gemara says, Amar Lach Rav Nachman will say to you, Lo, no, parim par avodah zara. When it says parim over here, it's referring to the par that's brought for avodah zara, meaning if the tzibur was involved in avodah zara. Afagav the tzibur, even though that's a carbon tzibur, kevon de lo kavia leizman, since there's no set time that it has to be brought, mehadrinan. So then we try to do it betara. And elim, what's elim referred to? Be'elo shal Aaron, it refers to the ram of Aaron, meaning the ram that is brought on Yom Kippur. The afagav de kavia leizman, even though that is a set time, it's brought on Yom Kippur. Kevon de yachidu, but since that's an individual carbon, it's brought by the Kohen Gadol, mehadrinan. So once again, we try to do it betara. And kivasim, what does it mean? Kivasim, bekeves haboim ha'omer, that's talking about the sheep that is brought together with the carbon ha'omer. And again, the carbon ha'omer, the ika shirayim lachila. That carbon mincha, there is a shirayim. Rashi over here explains, parda avodah zara, the tzibor, olahi, that's considered that's a tzibor, olahi utuna nesachim b'shlach lecha. That's a carbon ola, it requires nesachim, and that's what it says in Parsha Shlach, and therefore it's a minchas nesachim, and again there's no shirayim. Elo shel Aaron to Yom Kippurim, again that's the ram of Yom Kippur. Bekeves haboy ma'omer k'dechsiv v'asisim b'yom hanifchem es ha'omer. It says you're going to do it when you bring the omer, you'll have this keves. Ve'ahi minchas kivasim dekatani la b'minchas nesachim ka'amar. That's not talking about a minchas nesachim, to kaloli, which is totally burned. Again, there's no shirayim. Ela b'minchas ha'omer atzon. We're talking about the carbon mincha of the omer itself. Haboima, which comes together with the kvasim. V'nikmetzes, that's that you take a kamitza, v'shirah nechalin, and the rest is eaten. So again, whenever there's shirayim, we do admit that you have to do it betara lechatchila. And we should note over here that in the Havamin of the Gemara, when the Gemara said parim elim uchvasim dechag, that's specifically a reference to the parim elim and kvasim that are brought on sukkahs. Again, in that situation, you have minchas nesachim, which is kulo kolul, it all goes on the mizbeach, and there's no shirayim. And the Gemara continues with another question. Meisvei, we have a question from a brisa, dam shenitma. Let's say you have a situation where the blood became tamei, v'zark, when you did the zrika with that blood which is tamei, b'shogeg hortza, if you do it by mistake, then it works, the carbon is effective, b'mezid lo hortza, but if you do it b'mezid, the carbon is not accepted. And the Gemara answers, Kitanyo Hayida Yachid. That Bryce is not talking about a carbon sibor, it's talking about a carbon Yachid, and Rashi over here explains, b'mezid lo hortza, if you do it on purpose, the carbon is not accepted. Ve'afa pishat tzitz meratza. Now Rashi says, even though the tzitz is meratza and really the carbon is accepted, konsu rabbanon shelo yehi basar nachol. What the brisa means is that the rabbanon make a knas, they make a fine that you can't eat the basar. Avol bailam miu niskapru, but the bailam are going to get a kapara. Delo nesu chulin la'azar. We don't want them to bring another carbon. That's already going to be a problem of chulin la'azara. To hamidoraisa chazika, certainly midoraisa, this is effective. Umiu shaminan minei. But Rashi says, nevertheless, what do you see from here? You see the lav hetri, that it's not totally a heter. If it was totally a heter, the chachamim would not give you a knas. The fact that they're giving you a knas and say that the basar should not be eaten, that seems to show again that tumah is duchuya b'tzibor. Gemara's answer is, this price is not talking about a carbon sibor, it's talking about a carbon yachid. So then it makes sense, by a carbon yachid we would say b'mezid lo hortza. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from another brisa, al na tzitz meratza. The brisa says, on what is the tzitz meratza? Al adam v'al basar v'al chaylev shenitma. If you have the dam or the basar, the chaylev, they become tamei. Bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, bein b'onus, bein b'ratzin. Doesn't matter how they become tamei, whether by mistake, purpose, accident, willingly. Bein b'yachid, bein b'tzibor. Doesn't matter if you're talking about a carbon yachid or a carbon sibor. So the Gemara now asks, now if you think like Rav Nachman that tumah is totally permitted b'tzibor, lama leila retzuye, what do you need that sits to be meratza for? It should be completely permitted as is. Rashi over here explains, bein b'tzibor umideboyit sits l'retzuye. From the fact that you need that sits to be meratza, shma mino lav heteru, you see that it's not a heter. Uma bein yachid l'tzibor, what's the real difference between a yachid and a tzibor according to this? Shayachid ein tumas haguf nidchetzlo. The difference is, by a carbon yachid, if the person himself is tamei, that's not pushed off. Sheinat sitz meratza al tumas haguf, because the tzitz doesn't get involved. It's not meratza by tumas haguf. V'shel tzibor, when it comes to a tzibor, nidches tumas haguf etzlam, then tumas haguf is also pushed off. V'lo al yedei tzitz, you don't even need the tzitz. Miu shaminon mina, but nevertheless, what do you see from here? Midibayit tumas basar v'olin b'tzibor tzitz. From the fact that other kinds of tumah, meaning not tumas haguf, require the tzitz l'ratzuye in order to appease, in order to make the carbon accepted. Shma mina, you see from this, tumas haguf shenidches etzlam bekushi nidches. That tumas haguf also, when it's pushed off b'tzibur, that's bekushi. That's only like a b'diavad if you're already tamei. V'chol kama d'matzina la'adurei atara mahadrin. And certainly, if we could try to do it b'tara, we would. In other words, the point of the Gemara is, if the Brisa is saying that when it comes to tumah of the basar or the dam, you need the tzitz to be maratza, that would imply that when it comes to tumas haguf, it's certainly not hutra b'tzibur, it's going to be dechuya b'tzibur. So that's the Gemara's question from this Brisa. So the Gemara says, Amar loch Rav Nachman will say to you, Ki katani hatzitz meratza ad yachid. The line in the Brisa which says that the tzitz is meratza, that's only going on the carbon yachid, but you're right, when it comes to carbon tzibur, you don't even need the tzitz to be meratza. Rashi over here says, Ki katani hatzitz meratza ad yachid katani. V'tzibur ha'achshera katani. Tzibur is just kosher. Sha'af shel tzibur kosher. The tzibur is kosher just like the other ones. V'lo al yedei tzitz, but you don't need the tzitz when it comes to the tzibur. Ela heteru etzel, that's completely mutter. So that's the first answer of Nachman, that the phrase hatzitz meratza goes on the carbon yachid. V'boy, same if you want, I could say another answer. Afilu teima b'tzibur bahanach telo kaviyol ozman. It could be that it is going, you need the tzitz to be meratza on a carbon tzibur when you have a situation of a carbon tzibur that doesn't have a set time. In that situation, if there's no set time, you would try to do it b'tara if you could. Rashi over here says, V'boy seima at tzibur. Namika, if you want, I could say, we're talking about tzibur as well. Uvahanach karbanas de lo kavalu huzman. We're talking about the karbanas where there's no set time. Shelo nidches tuma etzlo kamar, where in that situation, tuma doesn't get pushed off, the tzitz meratz alei. And so in that situation, so then we say it's the tzitz that's meratz in those cases, because again, there's no kaviyas man. In theory, you could have pushed it off in terms of the timetable. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have another question. V'nasa Aaron es avon hakadoshim. It says that Aaron carries the sin of kachim. What sin are we talking about? V'chiyeza avon hunose. What sin does the pasuk mean when it says Aaron is carrying the sin? Im avon pigol harei kvar nemar lo yerotza. If you're talking about pigol, it already says it's not accepted. V'im avon noser harei kvar nemar lo yechashev. If you're talking about noser, it already says in the pasuk it's not considered. Rashi over here explains what we mean. V'hachi perusho eza avon yere bekarbon. What we mean over here is, what sin would happen by a carbon, shehei hatzitz meratza, all of shehei kosher, that the tzitz is meratza and it makes it kosher. Imavon machsheves chutz lemekomo hakruya pigol, if you're talking about pigol, which means that the Kohen has in mind to eat it outside of the proper place. Kedamin and bizvachim, like it says in Zvachim, shlishi zeh chutz lemekomo, harei kvar nemar v'kedoshim tiyu, pigol hu lo yeratza, pigol is not accepted. So we can't be carrying the burden of the sin of pigol. V'ukimna b'chutz lemekomo, Meseches Zvachim, that's exactly what it's talking about, chutz lemekomo. V'imavon machsheves noser shechisha maybe we're talking about noser where the guy had in mind to eat it outside of the proper time frame. It already says lo yechashiv by chutz lezmano. So it can't be that those sins are the ones that we're carrying. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Zayin Amud Beis.